I want to talk about Michael Gableman's investigation. For the first time last week, he revealed several names of his staffers and their salaries. Among some of them are conspiracy theorists. Others have very close ties to President Trump. Why should taxpayers trust this investigation if there are partisan people working on his staff?
Well, I would start by first of all saying that the term conspiracy theory kind of, obviously it's a negative connotation. So I think that people put ideas forward. Sometimes they are proven to be true, sometimes they're proven not to be true, but I wouldn't say they're conspiracy theories. So, I think some of the ideas.
You wouldn't say claiming the election was stolen is not a conspiracy theory?
No, because especially early on, many people felt, and probably still a sizable number in the country feel that the election was stolen. Now,
you don't feel that way, do you?
Well, I have said over and over that Joe Biden is the president. We are not going to go back and undo the 2020 election. That is not going to happen in Wisconsin. But I do think there were major problems that need to be fixed going forward so that everybody has faith that whatever the election results are, they were done fair and square. So bringing people on who question the election, that's what I want. I want people who are looking into the problems to say, yes, we've done the research. One of the gentlemen started out by saying he really thought there were issues with the machines. He did all the investigation. He came out on the other side saying, you know what, there really weren't issues with the machines. Okay, well, that's his belief. But that's the whole point of doing an investigation. Sometimes you start with one idea, and by the end, you realize that was either a faulty theory, or it totally was proven true, or there's more work to be done. So I think if you bring in people who are honest and objective, which I think Mike Gableman and his team that he's assembled are, they are looking for things where they might have started with an idea that they thought was true, and by the end they came to a different conclusion. That's what we want. That's what an investigation's for.
Now you're talking about the individual that you mentioned is Ron Huer, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Hoyer, I think it is.
Hoyer.
Yep.
Thank you for correcting me. Recently, Hoyer has posted a lot of, looking into his past, posted a lot of posts on Facebook kind of targeting black politicians. Some are really calling them inappropriate posts. Some Democrats are asking for him to leave Gableman's investigation. I don't know if you're aware of this, but they're kind of outlandish, and they're really targeting black politicians. Do you think Hoyer should still stay on Gableman's staff?
Well, I would say, first of all, I haven't looked into those, but I certainly will. We created an office of special counsel to be independent of the legislature. So we didn't sign off on the hires. We did not say you should hire this person and not hire that person. So I have to trust Justice Gableman that he is using the skills that he thinks are appropriate to make the investigation one that we can have confidence in by the end. I also believe that, I'm not saying you're doing it, but I think Democrats are attempting to kind of use McCarthyite tactics to say something that you might have said 10 years ago means you're disqualified from ever working on something else. I'm actually a believer in forgiveness. I think sometimes people say something stupid and they realize that and they move on. Or they realize what they said was probably outlandish at the time and they no longer own that comment. I don't know what he said.
He stands by his posts, but if you haven't seen them.
I haven't seen them. I'm just saying I haven't seen it. But I would say the most important thing for me is to have people who are in there digging into the truth. So at the end of the day, we know that people have the confidence in the election for both sides, to make sure that we're kind of moving beyond it.
And I know you keep saying about, restoring confidence in elections, but, when people see these stories, they see these headlines of who Michael Gableman is associating with, it's raising red flags for some people. They are concerned because of the people who are on his staff. Do you have?
But I think part of the problem, Emily, is that Democrats from the very beginning refused to accept that there were any issues with the election. So they have attempted to character assassinate, smear. People like the Audit Bureau, which has had a stellar reputation of nonpartisanship. The first thing the Democrats said when they read the report, rather than looking at it and saying, man, you got some good points here, we should at least take a look, they began to undermine the authority of the investigation that the nonpartisan Audit Bureau did because they didn't want to talk about what they found. And I feel like that's so much of what's been happening, not just with the Audit Bureau and other folks who've looked into the election, but with Justice Gableman. Rather than saying, you know what, you might have some decent points, let's actually look and see if you do. It's all about character assassination and trying to divert from the very basic idea of saying, let's confirm that the election was held fairly and that everything was according to the way it should be. They can't even accept that anything was done wrongly. That to me is where the real crime, where the real frustration has to be for most Wisconsinites, is that half the state can't accept the fact that maybe there were issues with it. And that's being led by a lot of these Democrats. What is the harm of looking into it? What is the harm of asking people to do a double check to say, hey, things were done perfectly? They don't even want to accept that as a possibility. That to me is the real big lie, is that there were no issues with the election at all, and we should just sweep it under the rug and act like nothing happened.
Speaking on Gableman's investigation also last week, he said that he filed a writ, basically in a sense, to throw the mayors of Madison and Green Bay in jail if they do not sit down with him for interviews. Do you want to see mayors thrown in jail if they don't agree to sit down with Gableman?
I want to see them cooperate. I mean, we have seen nothing more than obstruction from an awful lot of the folks who at the very beginning, because you remember, even last summer, before we put on Justice Gableman, we had asked them to come and testify in front of the Campaigns and Elections Committee. They refused. We then went ahead with Justice Gableman's investigation, and they also refused to sit down and talk with him. So if we have to use subpoenas, it's my understanding from Representative Branchin that she invited Eric Gingrich, the mayor of Green Bay. He said no. You know, people like that. So, I mean, we've tried to go through the traditional process. They've refused. Well, the only option we have left is to compel testimony. They're public officials. They should be happy to sit down with anybody and talk about the election.
But not in private. A lot of them are arguing, a lot of these officials say they don't want to meet with Gableman in private. They are more than welcome. These are their words. They'll go to the elections committee.
Well, why didn't they do that last summer? They chose to refuse. I mean, but the point comes.
Why in private?
Well, when you're doing an investigation, you do not do, I mean, when the Dane County Sheriff or anybody begins an investigation, they don't do it in public.
This isn't a Dane County investigation. This is.
No, that's what I'm saying, any investigation. When the Columbia County Sheriff, when any investigator begins their investigation, they don't sit down with everybody and say, let's do this all in public so everybody can see.
But this investigation is under your office.
Right.
You're authorizing it.
Right.
So why should it not be public?
Because eventually it will be, but you don't investigate in public. You investigate to be able to try to find the truth and then bring all your documentation out and say, yes, I was able to prove X or prove Y. The idea that they want to do it in public now, after they're being compelled, is what's partly frustrating because, again, they didn't want to cooperate all last summer. So they criticize us for having to allocate resources toward hiring attorneys to force them to participate. At the same time, they refuse to participate. Well, it seems to me that a lot of this could have been avoided if they would have explained why they use private resources, turned them into public dollars, and basically used the mayor's office as a turn out the vote effort for the Democratic Party to elect Joe Biden. That's exactly what we see. It happened with the money that came from Mark Zuckerberg, and we certainly see the way that was allocated across Wisconsin had a partisan intent. They have been embarrassed to even talk about it until now that we're using subpoena power. Now they're maybe willing to come and talk about it in public. Well, let's start sitting down with the investigators to tell them exactly why you did things. You can go out and talk about it in public. We're not saying you can't. But the investigation doesn't necessarily start and do its best work until we have the complete record put together. Then it becomes public.
So would you support Gableman's efforts, if it were to come to fruition, to throw these mayors in jail?
That would never be my first effort, right? I want them to cooperate. Let's hope they cooperate.